Hello everyone, I'm Thanos Bostanis. I'm a lecturer here at the Tizard Center at the University of Kent, where we offer two ABAI verified courses in applied behavioral analysis and positive behavior support. And we also have courses in autism and intellectual and other developmental disabilities with a mixture of campus-based and distance learning options for you guys if you or people you work with are interested in studying with us. We also have the Tizard Learning Disability Review, which is a peer-reviewed journal. So if you're working with individuals with a diagnosis of a learning disability or an intellectual disability, if you're working outside the UK, please do consider submitting your work to our journal. We're really keen to disseminate good practice in the field of LD and ID. So the journal club takes place every month, and the idea is to disseminate good practice in behavior analysis. So today we've got our esteemed presenter, Dr. Jamie Hughes-Lika. You will have seen her very, very impressive CV in the flyer, so I'm not going to go back to discussing that, but I have to say that she used to be one of my lecturers, so I know what a good presenter she is. She is very, very knowledgeable, and I'm sure you're going to learn a lot from her, and I have to admit that I aspire to being half as good as she is. You know, if I'm half as good as Jamie, I know that I'm doing really good work in the field and I'm helping kiddos. So Jamie, if you could just start by telling us a couple of things about what you're currently working on, and then you take it forward. For those of you who are gaining CEUs from us, I will deliver 3 keywords. You need to write them down and then email me at the end of the session. I will pop the email in the chat so you guys have that for your convenience. So Jamie, what are you currently working on?
Oh, so many things. It's so exciting to be here. Good evening to you. Good day to people that are in the state. I saw a Wyoming person. Welcome. That's exciting. I feel like I've traveled to be with you as it is a rainy, gloomy day here in Iowa where I'm at. So I feel like I need a cup of tea, my blanket, and then I'm here. I have switched gears from clinical practice to moving into more disseminating the knowledge about NDBIs. I've got various research grants in the mix, and I'm really wanting to help educate professionals about what is a systematic way to do staff training, implement services, and everything going. So to that, I've created Sage Learning Systems, which is an online platform that gives CEUs for BACB, QABA, IBAO, and it's a great opportunity to really take what you're learning and apply it, because all of our courses are application focused. So you're going to go through a course, and hopefully you'll see in this presentation kind of what they look like. I get very excited and very passionate about the topics, and you're going to be bombarded with a ton of awesome resources. And I had mentioned to Thanos that you guys will all get a copy of the slides. Don't feel rushed to write things down. The whole thing is coming your way. Use at your leisure to however best helps you understand NDBIs and how to maybe integrate them into your practice or to your university program. So we'll get started with the learning objectives. And I'm going to pop the camera down so I won't see the chat and I won't see you. If you need anything, just let Thanos know and just pause me as we go. We're probably going to be 55 minutes-ish. I got a lot of really good stuff and I didn't want to cut it. So if you have to jump off, you'll have the CEU word. And if you want to stay on and hand some questions to me, I'm happy to hang out as well. Okay, so I'm going to move you down here and then let's get going. Okay. So we've got 3 learning objectives that we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the core components of NDBIs. We're going to identify 13 key features, and we're going to compare and contrast similarities and differences between what I'm going to call traditional ABA programs and NDBIs. So I'm toggling back and forth between 2 screens. So if you see me looking back and forth, that's what I'm doing here. Terminology. So let me start off with a disclaimer regarding the terminology used during this presentation and how it might differ a little bit from what you're used to. So in the state, services for autism are typically funded by private health insurance. And as such, we kind of fall under the medical model with some of the terminology that we need to use. So this is going to be probably different from what you're used to hearing. So I'm going to do my best to remember my audience and to replace keywords throughout the presentation. But you are going to hear treatment as it relates to services, goals, and objectives. But you can easily replace that word with support as you listen to the presentation. Oh, sorry. So I always like to start first with looking briefly at what's happening with autism and why this matters when considering different treatment intervention or support models for young children with autism. So we're going to focus on the 0 to 3 population, but these services, this type of treatment can very easily be generalized to, for me, older kiddos are 4, 5, and 6, because that's the population I specialize in is 0 to 3. But I don't want you to think it's exclusive to this population. So I think we have to understand what's going on in autism when we think about selecting support services for our kiddos. So we know that many children with autism do not show as much of a strong interest in watching and interacting with people as other children do. We also know that, Thanos, this is more challenging than I thought to click back and forth, sorry. We also know that many children with autism do not seem to experience as much natural reward in social interactions with others. Many children with autism do not always recognize the importance of gaze, gestures, speech sounds, facial expressions, and that those are really important aspects of communicating with others. We know that there are struggles with imitating words, gestures, nonverbal behaviors. We need to pay attention to imitate others. It's a two-step process. You watch and you do. We also know that if we don't tune in to others around us, we miss opportunities to build foundational skills. We're going to talk a lot about foundational skills. We're going to talk about cascading effects. So if those are two new kind of phrases for you, don't worry, we're going to get into them in some more detail. Some children with autism seem to be less motivated, define that however you will, to share and engage with others. And we might see difficulty with learning to shift their gaze from people to objects in the environment. So if we see some of these differences with joint attention, we might have difficulties where they have a harder time trying to understand the meaning of those social situations around them. And we also know they might demonstrate some differences, not only in their preference to play alone, perhaps, but also in how they play with toys, which might also limit learning opportunities. So this is nothing new to you, I'm sure. So I want to look at this again from a social perspective. So autism spectrum disorder, hopefully that word isn't offensive, and the title, it's first and foremost a social issue that we're working with here. We need to really think about an important question being, how can social behavior be established through interactions with other people and to achieve interaction with other people when those interactions are not naturally reinforcing? And I really think it starts with better understanding that social motivation matters and understanding the social motivation theory of autism. So feel free to drop in the chat if that's new to you, if you haven't looked at any of the research studies out there. Okay, so social motivation models of autism suggest that, I'm going to slow this down because this is a really important sentence, that early onset impairments, or you can say differences, in social attention set in motion developmental processes that can ultimately deprive or limit the child of adequate social learning experiences. And as a result, this imbalance in attending to social and non-social stimuli can further disrupt the social skill and social cognition development. So that's a lot to unpack there in that sentence. And it's really interesting to kind of take autism all the way back to this theory and to understand social attention, social motivation, as we're looking at NDBIs that place a heavy emphasis on this. So we know the core diagnostic criteria for autism, as well as descriptions of the first year of life studies that showed children later were diagnosed with autism include infrequent orienting to one's name, diminished eye contact, social aloofness, whatnot, and that these differences in social attention are some of the first manifestations of autism that can be a pretty good predictor of autism in the toddler years. So in this social motivation framework, this impaired or difference in social cognition is seen as the consequence rather than the cause of this impaired social attention. This is a really great article by Chevalier and colleagues that was published in 2012. The reference is at the top of the page for you there, and you can find that article online as a full PDF if you're interested. So this social motivation theory of autism, this review suggests that the concept of social motivation capitalizes on the different findings that are out there, and it provides an integral picture of social motivation at the behavioral, the biological, and the evolutionary levels. And that is what I think makes this a fascinating article, because I don't read about that stuff too much, and I love to learn. So if you want to learn about some brain stuff going on, definitely check this out. One of the things that they outlined in this paper is a 3-tiered model for social motivation, which consists of social orienting, social seeking, and social maintaining. And they conclude that autism can be construed as an extreme case of diminished social motivation. And they share, like most researchers, that we need more tools to adequately measure social motivation. So definitely check this out. This is some really good stuff. Here's a more detailed look at the social motivation components that I just mentioned. So that theoretical framework suggests that diminished social motivation has cascading effects on a child's social development because it deprives or limits the child of early opportunities to engage in these meaningful social exchanges in their learning environments. And unfortunately, the majority of research studies that have looked at social motivation have focused on number one, the social orienting only. However, in 2021, Sue and colleagues published an article, which is the first study on, so last year, brand new, the impact of social motivation on language development in children with autism. And that this social, I'm going to hide my camera because I keep looking at myself, that they used a measure that includes items representing all 3 behavioral manifestations. So number 1, number 2, number 3. And while we don't have time to get into the article in detail, I wanted to share this with you as another really cool resource that you can review. The reference is provided for you there. So social attention, social motivation, important stuff. Developmental differences happening in autism around those key areas. So we're going to shift gears and talk about intervention approaches for infants with toddlers with autism, and just give you some more resources to kind of set the stage for where we are going with NDBIs. So another article here, excuse me, I have a toddler who attends a daycare, which is a cesspool of germs, and he is the best magnet to get those germs and distribute them in our house. So I apologize for my coughing.
Jamie, could I deliver the first keyword in the meantime? The first keyword is motivation. The first keyword for your CEU is motivation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the break. So if you've read this article, great. If not, check it out. It's back from 2015. So Zwagenbaum and colleagues reviewed a bunch of literature on interventions for children with autism ages 0 to 3. And they identified 24 randomized controlled trial, quasi-experimental, and open label studies. And their analysis back from this many years ago supports the effectiveness of integrating developmental and behavioral interventions for this young population. So based on the findings from their research here, they came up with 10 summary statements to guide clinical practice and future research directions. So if you don't have time to read that article, that's okay, because I made a little visual for you here. So statements 1 through 4 talk about the practice intervention guidelines. Statements 5 through 9 talk about the research recommendations. And statement 10, that's kind of floating there on the right, talks about potential impact of medical comorbidities. It's merely floating there on the left because I couldn't squeeze it on the graph, not that it's of any less value. So a really cool visual for you to look at if you want to learn more about interventions for this population. This is another really great resource if you're not familiar with it. It's a book, Educating Children with Autism. If you don't have it, don't worry. If you click on that link, it is a legit link to go somewhere from the site and download a full PDF of this book for you to review. And it's an oldie and a goodie. So there's still a lot of debate about how many hours of intervention does a child need? How many hours will be effective for a child to obtain optimal outcomes, whatever that may be. And I imagine it's going to be very different, as I lived in England and I remember working over there and providing services. And I don't remember very many children getting 30 to 35 to 40 hours a week of funded ABA programs. So very different environments, very different approaches to services. So I think it depends how much is enough. But I also think what we do with those hours matters. So instead of thinking about service intensity as only the number of hours of therapy or support that the child receives, what if we thought about it in a framework such as how they outline it in this book? What if we thought about it as the intensity being the context of what was done within those hours, such as the number of functional, developmentally relevant, or appropriate, highly motivating, high interest opportunities to learn, which is what I feel like we do within NDBI so very well. And that doesn't mean that the child is in therapy or receiving support services for all of their waking hours. It could be time spent with caregivers. It could be time spent doing leisure activities, time spent in play, time spent in the naturalistic environment, anything that doesn't look or smell like work. So it's not just about, I think, the number of hours, it's about what is done within those hours and the environment that they occur in. So following along with recommendations for young children with autism as it relates to NDBIs, we know that intervention should start as soon as possible. So the better the outcome, the better the long-term outcomes we can hopefully predict. Or you could think about it as the sooner you can intervene or provide support services, the sooner you can stop those cascading effects, or those social communication differences, or those restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, those RRBs, compound themselves by leading to further delay as a result of a lack of learning from others. So for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to focus specifically on the blending or combining of developmental and behavioral approaches for young children with autism. Here's my all the ways to ABA, as I like to call it, and different directions you might take for treatment programming or support. It's going to be varied, and it's going to be based on the individual needs of the clients or children that you are serving. I'm going to take just 2 minutes to quickly talk about my journey into NDBIs, because I feel like I can support NDBIs as ABA in practice. I can support them as a little bit different because I feel like I've been on both sides of the fence. So I started back in like 1998, many, many moons ago. So I've been around for a long time and I've seen a lot of really great things happening in our field. So back in the day, I would call it a traditional ABA program when I worked in Iowa for a school district, and CARD would fly out to Iowa where I lived and do monthly workshops. And I worked as an assistant for a little boy named Billy in a public school. And I just remember when we left the therapy room that was barren with nothing in it, no distractions, and we went to the playroom and we did a more play-based type of a session, and I followed his lead and his motivation. It was a paradigm shift, and I'll never forget the day that he ran to the door to greet me, as opposed to before we made that pivotal change, when he would literally run up the stairs, crawl under his bed, and his parents would be dragging him kicking and screaming out to the therapy room. That was not fun for anybody. So a slight paradigm shift, a little pivot in the approach was a game changer for me. I never could go back to any other way. So that was great. Then I wanted to learn more about working with kids with autism. So I moved to Colorado. I had an amazing supervisor who really walked me through verbal behavior, really talked about teaching in the natural environment, all that good stuff. So I love that. Wanted to learn more, moved to California to work for Dr. Partington, got really into Skinner's analysis of VB, learned more about contriving and contrasting different motivational variables to get clinical outcomes going. Learned about PRT, I loved going down that rabbit hole. Decided to move to England to do a PhD at the university. Did a parent-mediated NDBI study using a lot of PRT motivational strategies. When I was in England, ESDM research was coming out, got really into that, pursued certification and all that good stuff with it. So as you can kind of see my journey over the years, I have NDBIs at the top. And I have that at the top because while I am very, very much a proponent of ESDM, I pull from many of the different NDBI elements. I love Project Impact for their parent support information that they offer in that model. I really love Jasper for the regulation information that they have coming out. And we're going to talk about these a little bit in more detail throughout the presentation. So
Jamie.
I've been there, I've kind of seen a morph, and I think it's been great.
Jamie?
Yeah.
Could you just tell people what PRT ESDM stands for?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. I'm ahead of myself. Yes. So pivotal response treatment, early start Denver model, NDBIs is that naturalistic developmental behavior intervention, that big mouthful of everything. So I'm just kind of narrowing the focus of getting more into motivation, child-led, naturalistic developmental. I also narrowed the focus to the age range of children that I worked with to specialize in 0 to 3. Where you're looking at more of a developmental approach, which is why I keep kind of going down the path that I'm going down. Thank you for that. Okay, so all the ways to ABA. So I would say that ABA is considered the gold standard treatment for autism. I think people would probably disagree with that, but that's where I come from. I think it's great. I also think there are different ways to ABA and that there are different types of ABA. And I think it depends on your training and your background and who your supervisor is, for how it's integrated and how it's delivered. So I'm going to call it traditional ABA. So historically, kind of looking at the earlier forms of ABA, maybe more discrete trial teaching, DTT, highly structured, adult-driven, master repetitive trials. That's what I'm going to call as traditional ABA. And while children demonstrated progress with that, there were some drawbacks. It's not as motivating, it might not have been as developmentally relevant and so on. However, as with all things in science, research has paved the way for a different form of ABA to kind of evolve. And this new category of these ABA-based interventions, we're going to call Naturalistic Developmental Behavioral Interventions, NDBIs. So we have this little graph here, this visual, where NDBIs draw from the field of behavior analysis, and the principles are grounded in the science of ABA. But they also draw from developmental science, which provides us with information about how children develop, how they learn, which skills are precursors, and other things. And before we go into the details of NDBIs, we're going to take a look at some of the recent literature, because I think it's always great to kind of understand what's going on. So that big seminal paper that we're going to talk about was published in 2015. So reviews of data since then are relatively new. So 2019, 2020, 2021. So I want you to keep that in mind when we talk about research and support for NDBIs. While these have been around for a while, there are some really great meta-analyses that are happening. So here's one. So 2019, Teed and Walton, they wanted to consolidate the existing NDBI literature to really provide a clear picture of the effects of NDBIs on those specific child outcomes. So they found 29 studies, and their study pretty much summarized that NDBIs provide valuable clinical insight into child outcomes, and there's a need to highlight more research to determine what are the active ingredients of NDBIs, of the various models out there, and what may moderate those intervention effects. The references are all provided for you, and I believe almost all of these, except for one, are full access that you can get online. Or if you went to ResearchGate and searched for it and contacted an author, they will certainly send you a full PDF. So a year later, 2020, Sandbeck and colleagues published their paper that reports a summary of NDBIs since that 2015 paper that Schreidman published. So they keep saying over and over that NDBIs are emerging as an intervention type that's most supported from randomized controlled trials. and that NDBIs might be particularly useful for supporting development of social communication, language, and play skills. So their systematic review that they did from their article showed that overall, the quality of the empirical support for NDBI was relatively high compared to that of other intervention programs. 2020, again, TUPO conducted a meta-analysis that looked at 16 of the 29 studies they looked at, and they identified them to be of strong, good quality. So based on their results, they conclude that NDBIs are a promising approach for improving a range of outcomes for young children. I believe we've got 2 more here. So if you don't have time to review all the articles, just look at these meta-analysis. They've summarized it for you. It's a great platform to really understand what's going on with the literature, and then go down your own rabbit hole and get into more detail if you want. So Crank in 2021 examined the quality of evidence supporting NDBIs. So their study was to extend the results of the previous study back in 2020 by Sam Bake and colleagues. They found 27 studies that were extracted, and their data suggest, again, NDBIs are promising as an approach for supporting development for some, but not all, of the core and related features of autism in early childhood. So they're all kind of coming to the same point. This is a fantastic article. And if you want to learn more about how NDBIs align with the neurodiversity movement, this is a good one to read. So it was published by Shuck and colleagues back in 2021, and several of the authors identify as autistic. It discusses the strength-based approach of NDBIs, the importance of personal preference, motivation, and the parent and child buy-in for interventions. So that would be a really great one if you're interested in how that aligns, because it's a fantastic article. Okay, moving into Schreibman, 2015. So all of these wonderful authors up here that we could say authors of these named interventions designed for young children with autism, they put out this consensus statement designating that those approaches comprised a new intervention category called NDBIs. And this article summarizes the theoretical basis, the empirical support, requisite characteristics, common features, and they suggest some different research needs. So this is a seminal article for you to read if you really want to understand NDBIs. And I believe it was the recommended article that went out with the flyer. So think of NDBIs as an umbrella, and that there are a number of different models that fall under that umbrella. And some of these may look familiar to you, and some of them may not. So we have JASPER, Incidental Teaching, PRT, Project Impact, Enhanced Milieu Teaching, EMT, Early Start Denver model. I also made another visual for you that might help lay out the models again. So this is not an exhaustive list, but it represents a sample of the most prominent models with strong empirical support, and that these both demonstrate the literature or published manuals are available to describe and implement the model, and that the model itself or the core components that make up the model can be considered evidence-based practice. So I've also put the names of the researchers, developers, on here, so you can search for more information about the research approaches if you are so inclined to do so. So now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of NDBIs. We're going to go over what they are. And this is what I think makes the similarities and the differences between quote-unquote traditional ABA programs. So core components of NDBIs fall into these 3 general areas. We have number 1, the nature of the intervention targets. Treatment goals, supports, objectives. Number 2, the context in which the intervention is delivered, the setting, the environment. And number 3, the instructional strategies used. So regardless of which specific NDBI model under that umbrella that you are going to think about applying or integrating into your practice, they all share these common components. So let's look at number 1 in more detail. So on the left is where I'm trying to put my traditional ABA, and on the right, more of the NDBIs for our compare and contrast. So in traditional ABA, you might see more of an emphasis placed on academic skills, visual performance, self-help. There might or might not be a curriculum or curriculum guide used that attempts to follow a developmental trajectory or scope of sequence for learning. Whereas in NDBIs, the focus is placed on several domains that are essential or critical to early learning development. Thinking about foundational skills and these cascading effects again. So these goals and objectives work to support developmental differences related to social communication, social interaction. And there are many pre-linguistic skills that are addressed. We talk about imitation, gestures, nonverbal behaviors, joint attention, and you will likely see some of those skills targeted in traditional ABA programs as well, which is fantastic. I often find that the developmental component of NDBIs is what can provide a challenge for many BCBAs who did not receive training in developmental sequences or child development, but they are often tasked with creating treatment plans and targeting these early social communication domains. So a little potential issue there. So this is just a sample of developmental domains shown here. And it will likely cover most of the areas that children might need support with, and they're essential for early learning and development. However, each child is different, so their programming and their focus should be individualized. One child might need programming for all of these domains and fall under a comprehensive program. One child might need support in programming for a few of these different domains, such as you would find in a focused program. So I love the Early Start Denver model. We're going to talk about that in a little more detail. And you're familiar with that ESDM curriculum checklist, you'll know that they target pretty much all of these developmental domains. So if you're not familiar with it, it is a curriculum checklist that has 480 skills across 4 different developmental levels, aging ranges 9 to 48 months. So it was developed for children with autism, attempts to follow a neurotypical kind of developmental sequence for the skills, and it's pretty comprehensive. I love it. I've had to standardize it myself a little bit more in practice and put some numbers on it to make it more objective for me. That's the behavior analyst coming in mixed with the developmental side. But it's fantastic. You could also use an ABLES-R, a VB-MAP, PEAK, Essentials for Living. There's lots of different curriculum guides available out there. But what I love about the ESDM is the developmental component to it. So here is an example of possible early intervention treatment goals that you could think about utilizing to support social communication, foundational skills, learning to learn skills, learner readiness, whatever you want to call those. But essentially, these are so important, but I don't find them in many traditional ABA programs, or I find them after, very much out of a developmental sequence, after core visual performance skills and some imitation with objects are put in place. So they're kind of focusing them a little bit out of sequence. And one of the really good reasons, I think, for getting into NDBIs and when working with young children is because they focus on these very important or critical development skills that can really impact learning outcomes. So we know that these treatment objectives selected are going to come from a broad range of these developmental domains, and the skills are based on the cascading effect. So what do I mean by that? Well, here's my visual that has how everything kind of is connected together. So you can think about cascading effects as the flow or progression from a lower level skill towards a higher level skill and kind of how they work in between. So these skills play a foundational role in later development, especially as it relates to the core social developmental differences for autism. So joint attention is a big one. So responding to joint attention bids is a skill considered to be a critical foundational skill for subsequent learning. We know 6-9 months, joint attention starting to develop. So it's a really important skill to share those different interactions and to have that connection with other people. And when that is delayed, again, we have effects that compound other things, and we see that carrying out over and over. I also think from a provider or a clinician standpoint, it's really important that we understand how skills layer on top of each other so that these prerequisite or foundational skills are not overlooked, or that we are selecting support goals for a child that they're not ready for. And this is, again, where that developmental science comes in to help guide us to better understand what it looks like. I think another one of the important aspects of NDBIs is that learning context, number 2. So one of the big differences from previous or traditional forms of ABA are where the learning is and how it's conducted. So within NDBIs, the learning trials are embedded within the activity as opposed to sitting down and using flashcards or running drills. And sometimes there's a time and a place for that, absolutely. And a more structured approach can be very helpful for many individuals. But we want the child to have the opportunity to learn within their natural environment during routines and activities and socially meaningful interactions with others. And these skills are not usually taught discretely or in isolation. They occur over the course of the child's daily interactions, activities, and routines with multiple materials and people. This is my soapbox, and I'm going to jump on for 1 minute here. I oftentimes hear staff say, we do teaching in the net, or we do natural environment training or teaching. So my soapbox is, please note that doing discrete child teaching in the natural environment is not the same as doing an NDBI type approach. And while there are traditional ABA programs that are delivered in natural environments, staff using these approaches typically control the learning trials. It's adult-driven. The selection of instructional targets doesn't always match the activity that's happening, and it might not be informed by a developmental sequence. So I think it seems that behavior analysts understand that NDBIs happen and really are supportive in that natural environment, but they might not fully grasp the developmental perspective, theory, and teaching procedures that are utilized that really make up what it is. I saw this visual online the other day, and I really liked it because I think some of the struggles with getting behavior analysts to really come on board with NDBIs is that there are some misconceptions about what happens. So child-led does not equal child-run, and they give some really cool examples here. So one of the things that we can also do to better support staff to really integrate NDBIs is to help them understand how to structure the interactions when we're following the child's attention, their lead, their motivation, and really trying to capitalize on that. So one great NDBI that really does well with this is the Early Start Denver model. So again, practitioners that are new to really working in the net from this kind of a developmental behavioral perspective, I think they struggle with how to structure the learning opportunities in the natural environment. I have the learning objectives. I have in my mind what I want to do to create a teaching interaction, and the child is over here doing their own thing. What am I supposed to do with that when I'm supposed to follow their lead and they might be doing something that doesn't look appropriate or functional or whatever you want to call it? And they struggle with that. So one of the things that we can do is utilize JARs, joint activity routines, and work within this 4-part framework of setting up an activity, which could include following the child's lead, setting up a theme or hooking into what they're already doing, trying to vary it or following their variation, and then closing it down. And there's a whole thing behind this whole approach, but I wanted to show you that there are ways to structure the learning opportunities, and it can be really helpful to help create those opportunities to keep the child jointly engaged with us. Okay, the third and final element. Yeah.
Let me stop you there just to deliver the keyword. Our second keyword for your CEU is Denver. Our second keyword is Denver. Thank you.
You're like a bingo announcer. You would make a great bingo announcer, Fano. You have bingo there, yeah?
I'm literally just making them up as you go.
That's
my style. That's always what I do.
I like it. I like it. Okay. So NDBI strategies promote learning and motivation within these contexts and routines. But we also use behavioral strategies. So I tried to put on the left here what I thought would be deemed as more behavioral strategies in nature, and on the right, strategies that we're pulling in from the developmental science. And I put an arrow next to shared control because this is something that a lot of behavior analysts aren't familiar with. These are my favorite type of strategies to really get attention, motivation, and bring it all together. And where I really see those outcomes booming because I have social attention, working with social motivation, and supporting and scaffolding that. So, flip my slide here. So shared control is essential to all NDBIs, and it's an effective way to promote the social reciprocity. Again, that relationship developmental aspect that might not always be as evident or as prominent in traditional ABA programs. So this shared control really increases that social motivation. And they do that by placing an emphasis on social reciprocity during these back and forth interactions. So the child is speaker, the child is listener, if you want to think about it from that standpoint, vice versa. So I went and made a little visual for you. You can Google shared controlled strategies. We're going to talk about a resource that I have at the very end. There are many out there available. Here's a worksheet that I created that kind of tells you what it is, what it looks like, a few different examples and practice. And then I always like to have a consideration or a clinical consideration category that you could then create and individualize for different learners. Over on the right are additional strategies. A lot of speech language pathologists use these, so that would be a good place to start looking for some more supports and resources for shared controlled strategies. Or Googling, I'm sure, silly situations, sabotage, providing assistance. Some of these are probably familiar to you. Some of them might not be. I love them. They're one of my favorite things to integrate within sessions. Here is just one little visual that you can have to reference again, kind of traditional ABA adult directed versus NDBIs, not so much. You guys still with me? You doing great? Okay. Another visual that I saw online that really made me think about the differences between traditional ABA and NDBIs. I think sometimes as traditional ABA as product driven, the little cat on the left, where it's predictable, we have scripts and routines and prompt hierarchies, and a teacher might be doing more, or it might be adult directed and driven. And then I think about NDBIs as process driven, where it's unpredictable because we're following the child's attention and their lead. Maybe it's more open-ended with natural occurring opportunities with different materials in the environment. And the focus is on how we get there, not so much what we do when we get to the end. So I was just playing around with that. It just made me think about how I can see a difference in the implementation for me between the two different models. So this is a visual that I have for you here, and it's just a quick snapshot from the Schreibman 2015 article. So we're going to go in, we've talked about the core elements. Now we're going to go into the 13 different features of NDBIs. So all of these NDBIs utilize a three-part contingency. So the antecedent, the response, the consequence, to help the child understand when to provide the response and when we're going to give feedback to the child. We have clear procedures and manuals that are for each different intervention, one of those models that are under that umbrella. So that's a really important part of using NDBIs, is that we have that manualized practice. We have fidelity of implementation to ensure that the services that are provided accurately. So we want to make sure, and we can probably hypothesize that the higher the fidelity of the implementation, maybe the better the outcomes we're going to see. I'm sure there's a research study on there. Actually, I know there is one for ESDM that was just published about that. So yes, we can support that. Individualized treatment goals are support goals. They're developmentally based strategies in developmental scopes and sequences to guide that goal development and to individualize it for each child. We have systematic data that's collected. It took me some time to really be okay with a different type of data collection that we do in NDBIs as opposed to more of a traditional ABA. And I felt that it was looser and I felt like it wasn't of the best quality control. But then I really stood back and thought about what we are trying to accomplish with supporting joint engagement and social reciprocity, and continuous data collection systems really can impede that and take away the purpose for that process-driven approach. So we're going to talk about different ways to collect data. Child-initiated, child-led, child interest, child choice. The goal of these child-initiated teaching episodes is to increase the child's motivation for participation. And for me, that goes back to social attention and social motivation theories of autism. We're trying to tie it all together, kind of at the root cause. Environmental arrangements. We do a lot of this in ABA programs. We're really trying to facilitate the child initiation of these skills and the learning of different target skills. So we're using these environmental arrangement strategies across NDBIs, and all of them do these differently. But again, we have these same core common elements that we're following. Natural reinforcement. Again, we're within an activity. The reinforcement is related to the activity as opposed to maybe edibles or tokens or a break from learning or something not so much intrinsic, if you will. And so it's really important that that child is connecting the reinforcing activities and the reinforcers to what we're doing, and that it's happening in a social aspect. All of the NDBIs, again, use these balanced turns and those shared controlled strategies. So we're scaffolding, we're cueing, we're trying to promote these new skills and deliver these contingent reinforcers. Modeling, something we do in ABA programs. So looking at the interest of the child, really focusing on how we can help them display that skill and how we can teach them with more learning opportunities. Adult imitation of child actions. This is fantastic stuff. If you start to think about reciprocal imitation training, or if we start to think about contingent imitation mirroring, there's some fascinating articles out there about this. So we're using this strategy to increase the child's responsivity and their attention to us to continue that interaction. And finally, we're looking to place an emphasis on the teaching in these natural varied settings with real life materials. And this is really going to help broaden the child's attentional focus. So those are 13 of these common features of NDBIs. So here they are again for you in a visual that I made. So you can see them listed on the left and a little bit of a description for you on the right. So you can get this from that Schreibman 2015 article. You can refer to this little visual here to have you guide through that. Okay, just one more, maybe a couple more articles that I think are great. So 1968, Bear, Wolf, and Risley wrote their article that identified those 7 dimensions that guide practice and research grounded by ABA. In 2020, Vivanti and Steamer published this article that examined whether the ESDM, one of the models under the NDBI umbrella, meets the parameter for each of these 7 dimensions. And their critical analysis suggests that it does. And therefore, ESDM can be situated within the landscape of ABA practices. So they discuss how ABA parameters met by the ESDM include the main points outlined in, I'm trying to think if this will be relevant for you. There's an ABA for ABA, an ABA for ASD treatment guideline document that the BACB put out in 2014. And the second edition is now with CAS, Council for Autism Service Providers, that was done in 2020. Those are all online that you can find in Google. So I'm trying to think if that transcends over to the practice in the UK, and I think it could. So they reference that. But then they also discuss how the ESDM meets criteria for the Professional and Ethical Compliance Code, the PECC, as it relates to Section 2.09. So that they did a really cool article about ESDM as it can be considered ABA and how it relates to our field and practice and how it relates to our Ethical Compliance Code, which again might vary a little bit for where you guys are at over there. So that'd be another really cool article to check out. Don't want to read it? You just want the summary? Here you go. Here's a visual with our Get a Cab, little acronym for all of the different 7 dimensions, what they mean by it, and how they say that the ESDM can relate to it. So page 1, page 2. Okay, I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but we're getting to the good stuff. We're almost there. So how to integrate NDBIs into existing ABA programs. So let's shift gears and talk about that. However, before we do that, we need to better understand the training and resources that we might need to do so. Last article, I promise, that we're going to show you, and I'm going to show you why it's important. So we want to integrate NDBIs, but what do we need to know, and how are we going to do that? Well, in 2022, Hampton and Sandberg conducted this survey study, and they did that to describe and understand the knowledge and beliefs that BACB certificates have around NDBIs. So I don't know if you did that survey. It was sent out through the BACB certificate mass email. If you did, you can chime in on the chat. So they sent it out to over 37,000 certificates, 1,295 clicked all the way through, and 901 actually completed the full survey. So they had a bunch of different open-ended questions about knowledge of NDBIs, familiarity, use of them in practice, belief about them being effective interventions, and they reported data for a supervisor and as well as the technician level staff. We're just going to talk about the supervisor data, just a few of the highlights here. So 32% of the supervising respondents reported they had not received formal training. 57% believe they're important for professionals, they being NDBI approaches, and only 44% have received consistent training in developmental child development scopes and sequences. So the results of this survey that they sent out suggest again that few behavior professionals recognize or understand excuse me, what NDBIs are in practice. Yet the majority of the respondents reported working with young children with autism on these social communication developmental domains. So it seems like we have some discrepancy in some survey data to support we need more training for this. So another quick survey that I did for an agency that I consult with here in the States was on the same topic. So looking at helping to support services for children 0 to 3 to better meet the needs of the clients across their network, we sent out a survey, and we're just going to highlight a portion of the responses. 30 to 40% felt confident with their ability to implement services. 30 to 40% confident developing programs. 30 to 40% confident in their ability to support technicians. So not that great, right? So as a result of the focus groups that we have developed, the data from this survey, we were able to come up with a list of ideas and activities that were prioritized for development. So one of which was the development of clinical practice guidelines. Sorry, I'm clicking the wrong slide. So if we are going to think about integrating NDBIs into our practice, and maybe in the chat you guys can say if you are doing NDBIs, if you've had formal training, that would be some great data just to have to look at. So one of the things that we really thought about, recommendations for other entities to really incorporate this and have that paradigm shift blend and combine developmental plus behavioral intervention, was to come up with a process for how we do that. So you can consider developing a set of practice guidelines and clinical recommendations. Think about the assessments that are available for young children or whatever age range of population that you're servicing. Create treatment goals and objectives. What are those going to look like from a developmental perspective, from foundational skills, thinking about cascading effects? How are we triaging or prioritizing the different goals that we're working on? What are your data collection systems going to look like? It's going to be very different from an NDBI program than a traditional ABA program. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just different, right? What staff training and resources are needed? What fidelity implementation criteria and measures are you going to use? So we spent the past year creating clinical practice guidelines to help ensure that anyone that is 0 to 3 years old that rolls through this program, the infant toddler autism program, is going to receive services consistent with the approach best aligned for these individuals' needs. So these are just some of the main headlines that are in these practice guidelines. So we're going to go through these quickly. So assessments. We should be having assessments that are different for every child, but they should ideally include formal and informal measures and utilize a combination of standardized assessments, curriculum checklist, and behavioral observations. Maybe a bit different from where we are in the States to some of the assessments that you're using in the UK. So here's just an example of an appendix from the guidelines that I designed for BCBAs. Here are a bunch of different assessments, what the purpose is, what the age range is, what are the domains we're looking at developmentally, what's the format for administering it, how long does it take, any key tips, what materials might be needed. So again, as we work with insurance funders who have different requirements, some things over here in the States might be different from over there. But essentially, are you using appropriate assessments for the individuals that you're providing services and supports to? Before we go on and develop those goals, it goes back to the assessment. Do we have that comprehensive baseline assessment done? And that really helps us identify and understand the client's baseline level of ability. So we kind of have to have that to really outline those relevant domains within that developmental framework. So it's important for us to really think about cascading effects and think about outcomes and context to kind of make it all go together. So there are different assessments that you can use that are going to help develop those goals and guide that trajectory, or you might pull from a variety of different areas. Here's another visual that's in the appendix. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong one. It's just a crosswalk. So maybe you use the VB map. Maybe you're interested in the ESDM. How do they align? Create yourself a crosswalk here. So it's just, here are the goals and the skill items and the ESDM. How do they align with the VB map? You could do that with an ABLE-SAR. You could do it with the Vineland, any other different assessment that you use. It's just helpful to have that developmental reference and sequence put into it. And sometimes there are things in the VB map that I use that aren't in an ESDM and vice versa. So there are just numerous resources out there available to you. Data collection systems. We might have interval recording. You don't see as much trial by trial, cold probe kind of in NDBI type programs. I am a big fan of the interval right now. And I love to record that and look at it later because it doesn't take away from the joint engagement and that social reciprocity between me and the toddler. And if you work with toddlers, you know it's hard to get their attention and to keep their attention, and their attention isn't very long. So the last thing I want to do is lose my learner to drop a data point. But I also recognize that the data points are important. You can't measure what you don't. You can't monitor what you don't measure, right? You can't manage what you don't measure. So we need that there. So I like to think about different ways to take data. And I think it's really helpful to think about various social communication behaviors and to consider the different types of data collection to measure progress in those. So maybe we have a goal for requesting. The child can request an item. Cool. But can they also request or protest? Can they request for an activity to continue, like recurrence? Can they say they're all done? Can they express their thoughts? How do you take data on that? What does the data look like to socialize and interact with others? Just seek and to share knowledge, asking and answering questions like interverbal type stuff. So there are all of these different communicative functions that I think are really important for us to take data on as we look at social communication delays, social motivation issues. We want to make sure that we have a good handle on that. So different ways to take data could be interval. Here's just an example about child initiation behaviors. I think in traditional ABA programs, we do not hold enough space for child initiations. We are zero latency prompt, fade prompt, get it done, get that product, get that data point, as opposed to holding space and pausing for the child to be the speaker and to really let them initiate and to scaffold and support them in a different way. So are they initiating only to request something? Do they request help? Are they showing you something? Are they seeking comfort? Are they having other social purposes? Those to me are really important social communication behaviors. So perhaps we have a data sheet where we have the operational definition on the top. Maybe you do a frequency count. Maybe you code it from an interval type system. Go ahead, Lana, sorry.
Just to deliver the third keyword. The third keyword for your CU is natural. The third keyword for your CU is natural. Yes, you will get the slides when I email you the CUs. If you want, Jamie, we can continue. If some of you need to go, that's all right. Don't forget, we've got the video recording anyway, so you can catch up with the remaining of the session in our YouTube channel. Sorry to interrupt, Jamie. Go ahead.
No, you're good. We've got like 10 slides, probably 6 more minutes left. If you want to hang out and if you want to jump off, you can catch it at the end. Thank you for that keyword. If you're jumping off, it was great to have you with us tonight. Thank you. And if you're staying, here we go. All right, joint attention. Again, another critical key area. So how are we tracking joint attention? Are we tracking it from an initiation from the child? Is it response? Those are two totally separate repertoires. We could talk for 3 hours on joint attention and just talk about how amazing it is and how sophisticated it is and can be to teach it. So are we tracking joint attention because we're showing something, we're giving something, eye gaze, pointing, vocalization? Is that point proto-imperative? Is it proto-declarative? It just, you can keep breaking out different components for all of these skills. And it goes back to social orienting and social referencing before we share joint attention. So it just goes back to those foundational critical areas. So what are some ways that we're tracking joint attention as opposed to just a frequency count? What's the context? What does it look like? What are some of the staff training needs that you might have? Well, if you're working with young children, you should probably understand child development, how it typically occurs. Also, understanding some of the developmental differences that are commonly associated with autism. So one of the things that we've done as part of our project is to go in and create a foundational learning series. So any staff that works with the population 0 to 4 in this particular agency will go through this foundational training. So these are micro training courses, 20 minutes long. And we have the foundation here laid out. So foundational series, and then the bricks on the left are additional courses that staff will go through as relevant and as needed. So we need to understand how to best support child engagement. We're looking for joint engagement for all of our interactions. We need to make sure that we're supporting child regulation. What do we do when we start to see dysregulation? How do we support the learners? How do we make sure that we're promoting child initiations, that the child is the speaker, that we're really holding space for that? Joint attention, joint attention, joint attention. How critical is that? What do they need to know about it? Understanding child development, play, skills, social. What's quote unquote typical until it's not. So looking at working with toddlers, there are a lot of things that they do that's pretty typical for them to do at that age. And when do we start to see that pendulum swing over to where we might need to offer some more support? The overarching developmental strategies that fall under NDBIs, and so on. And then the brick will continue to morph as it goes. So this is an example of a training support that goes along with the training. So this one is for supporting child engagement. So these visuals can be really great for staff to keep on a tablet, print off and put in a binder for them to really understand this is what engagement looks like, and you can customize or individualize it for a child. This is what it doesn't look like. When you start to see this, you need to stop and do something different because we want these happy, relaxed, engaged learners, right? If we're starting to push through this stuff when we're losing engagement, losing attention, losing motivation, it's not a good place to have for optimal teaching. Another visual that you could use for staff that we talk about with monitoring child's engagement level. So kind of a stoplight system. I think you guys have red, yellow, green there. I'm sure you do. So green, go ahead, the kid's engaged, keep progressing as needed. Yellow, yield, caution, some things are starting to pop up. You might want to look at troubleshooting at this level. And we get to red, we're really significantly diminished with our engagement. The kid is just done. Stop, reverse, turn around. If you keep pushing at that level, you're going to see probably situations where you might have some behaviors that challenge that arise. So these can be great clinical supports to help staff understand how to go through and work through a decision-making model and follow kind of a decision-making flow tree, regardless of what approach you use to clinical treatment. And then the last thing that we have here is the fidelity. So how are you measuring fidelity of the intervention components that you're putting into place? So this is a quick little visual for 1 to 5, kind of overarching early start Denver model fidelity. On the right, you can see all of the different key fidelity items. And for each of those items, 1 through 5, there is a specific rating that goes with it. So not this generic one that I'm showing you, but just a way, again, most of the NDBIs have fidelity forms already created for them to help you implement and practice. Okay, I'm gonna take one drink and we're gonna blow through resources and we're done. Okay. Recommended readings. This is a great place for you to get started. If you want to learn more about NDBIs, that's in there for you for a resource. Project Impact, one of the NDBIs that's under that umbrella. They have an assessment and curriculum guide that goes with their book. This is the published manual. It's the 2nd edition that's out right now. They have online courses for beginner and advanced, and they have a certification program. So if you really want to make the leap and give formal training in NDBIs and really put them in practice, there are resources available. You can click on the link for their website and learn more. Pivotal response treatment, again, website provided for you to learn more. They have published manuals and books. They have on-site training courses and online levels 1 through 5 system and a certification program. The book on the top right corner, the green one that says Classroom Pivotal Response Teaching, it's a fantastic book with a CD-ROM and a disc that you can get for reproducible materials. And they have some really, really cool stuff there. So that's a great resource to utilize as well. The ESDM, they have that curriculum checklist that's available we talked about. They have published manuals for the clinical, for the parent coaching, for group ESDM applications. They have on-site and online training courses for beginner and advanced levels, and they have a certification program. I put a arrow by the yellow book in the top right corner because this is my favorite book of all of my books and all of my libraries around the world that I've had that I refer to the most. It's just full of gems of ideas. It's designed for parents, but when we're getting staff to really think about implementing NDBIs, it's fantastic. It's $17 US dollars, I think, on Amazon. So definitely check it out. It's amazing. And then our last resource here is Jasper. So Joint Attention Symbolic Play Engagement Regulation. This manual was just published within the last year. It's fantastic if you want to look at regulation and support for children. They have a space assessment, which is the short play and communication evaluation, a really different way to think about measuring some of these goals and the child's capacity for engagement, play, and social communication. They also have online and on-site courses for beginner and advanced, and they have a certification program. So lots of resources available for you. I have a 11-hour course for CEUs because I can't think of cutting anything because it's that much information to really learn anything and everything about NDBIs. So there's 118 lessons. They're very fun, very fast-paced. 90 downloadable resources to take what you're learning and put it into practice. And there's 35 videos of NDBI type developmental strategies shown to you so you can see what it looks like in practice. So you can click on the link or you can scan that QR code and it will take you there. Yay, we did it. I don't think we're too far over. Thank you. This has been amazing. You can drop me an email if you want to learn how to integrate NDBIs or you just want to bounce some ideas. I'm happy to chat about that. You can follow us on social media. One of my goals is to disseminate information for practitioners and for parents. So this is a great way to do that when we post on these social media platforms. It has been wonderful. I feel like I've been back in the UK with you all. Thank you for your time and your engagement tonight. You've been brilliant.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hughes. It was a very, very informative and so many resources, and I'm sure people will follow up. Have I got any pressing questions for Jamie? I know we've kept you a bit longer, but if there are any pressing questions, we've got one. Okay. Jamie, do you have access to the chat? It's quite a long one, so it might be best if you just quickly read through it.
Yep, I will do that right now.
Guys, please email me your 3 keywords, your full name as you want it on the certificate, and your BCBA certification number, not your account number. My email was in the chat. I'll pop it one more time.
Yes, I see the question for Ruby. Ruby's fantastic. I've used that a lot. You could definitely use this with NDBIs. Again, I think this developmental approach, just the social reciprocity, communication, joint engagement, it can be applicable to any population, not just the itty bitties that I happen to work with. And I think really thinking about using Ruby in conjunction with some of the project impact stuff they have might be a really good mix to put it together. I think you can easily adapt that. So you would just change the learning context or perhaps the teaching materials to something that might be more age appropriate for that adolescent or that adult, for sure. Absolutely. But Ruby is great. Let me see if there's any other questions in here.
Yeah, if you can scroll down towards the end.
Yep, you guys are all going to get those slides, everything on there. You can use those in staff training. Feel free to go ahead and look at that. I see some people have read the Shuck article. That's great. The neurodiversity, it's fantastic. I'm trying to think, if people are doing NDBIs in the UK. I'm sure there are some ESDM certified professionals in England. Probably some PRT, pivotal response training. I'm trying to think. I moved in 2006. It's been a while since I've been over there. But I'm sure that there are some individuals that are utilizing this. So I'm trying to think if there are local resources that you could refer to if you have families that are looking for this type of approach. I also understand that the diagnostic process is a little bit different over there, where you might be not getting the itty bitties as young as we're picking them up over here for a diagnosis. Again, that doesn't mean at 4, 5, and 6 that this is still not important. If you're a 5-year-old, chronologically but developmentally, you're missing all of that stuff, it's a good place to start thinking about foundational skills and cascading effects to build up these repertoires for learning. So I don't think it's specific only to the itty bitties, although that's where the population is and that's where the research is coming. So
Jamie,
fantastic.
we've got one more question. If you could scroll down towards the end.
Yeah. Sorry, I see. Thank you. Is there a name?
It says, hi, I have a question. I'm creating a parent training and I'm thinking about using NDBIs in combination with a parent training curriculum based on ABA principles.
Yep, I got that one. Yep, Ruby, that's a good one. So, hi, Lois. Hi. Yep, so you could definitely use the two of those together. Ruby is a great program. Very
you already answered that. Sorry.
Yes, yeah, that's okay. The Ruby. Yep.
Cool. I thought Ruby was the name of the participant. That's why I kept scrolling down, trying to find who's Ruby. I cannot see a Ruby in the chat.
Very popular.
I'm missing something. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. I think the biggest difference is the developmental teaching strategies. Like I said, joint attention, social engagement, social motivation. Those are hour-long talks just in and of themselves. But I really think NDBIs are hammering away at this as kind of the core feature and some of the developmental differences. And if we support them, look at those cascading effects and look what we're doing to support the individuals with their learning needs. And not as much repetition because you're teaching them to learn and you're focusing on learner readiness skills. I just feel like you get more bang for your buck when you're taking it from this paradigm shift and when they are motivated and it's fun. I think the burnout is less for therapists and practitioners. I think parents share more connection and engagement with their kids because we're working on motivation. I just feel like it's a different look and feel to therapy or support sessions. And that's why I don't think I can ever go back. I think it's fantastic.
We've got one more interesting question. I don't know if you had a chance to answer this one. I can see how taking a child's lead will work well with neurodiversity. However, how advocates feel about trying to teach certain social skills that may aim to make kids look neurotypical.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's always a difficult situation when you're looking at, I don't know if they perceive it, but I don't think the aim is to make kids look neurotypical or be like neurotypical kids. I think it's to support them in their learning to have the best quality outcomes and improve the quality of life and to be able to have meaningful connections with other people. So if we're looking at play skills, it's not that they have to push the train on the track, right? It's how are they connecting with us? They're chewing, I'm chewing over here, and we're chasing the trains around on the track, and that is our engagement. Or the trains are all parked up lined up at the station and we're washing them as they're in a row, whatever it is that's motivating for that child is what we should be following and joining in with their lead, because we all have individual preferences and takes on things. So the goal and the aim is not to make them look, which I think can be difficult when we're looking at following a neurotypical trajectory, right? And so do we want them to match that? We want to close the gap. We want to help them catch up and to be able to have skills to lead, the best quality life they can. And that is how children learn. So we have to kind of follow that. It doesn't mean we want them to look like their neurotypical peers or be like that or remove the autism or anything, not at all. It's how can we best support them, following their motivation, their attention, what they're looking for. Skills-based treatment. Yeah, Hanley, happy, relaxed, engaged, all that good stuff that he's got coming out. I feel like that's what we do in NDBIs all day long. So it's nothing new for us. I think it's fantastic. And I hope that the Shuck article, the neurotypical article that kind of supports it, I think that's a great one to read. And I think it's fantastic that some of the authors identify as autistic to see their perspective, how they really feel like NDBIs align with this movement, maybe better than other ones. But there are fantastic ABA programs out there that are integrating this. And it's just such a wide umbrella ABA is, from more hardcore, rigid, traditional to more naturalistic, infused verbal behavior approach, verbal behavior development theory. It's just so diverse. And I think that that's a good thing to individualize for the needs of the learners that we serve. And it's our job to figure out what the best approach is to help support the learners that we work with based on their needs, family values, cultural differences, all of those things that we should take into consideration. For sure.
Excellent. Jamie, thank you ever so much. It's been amazing. I strongly recommend you guys check out the website with Jamie's training. I've done one of the courses and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm gonna be doing more. You always have something to learn from Jamie. That's my motto. So thank you, thank you again, Jamie, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everybody.
Our next journal club is gonna be early November with Dr. Ledford. I will, from Vanderbilt University, I will start disseminating the flyer very, very soon. Thank you again, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Have a great week.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.